You're very welcome to another episode of the Scaling Your Business podcast. For this episode, delighted to be joined by Ben Wharton, the CEO of Message Lab. Ben, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Typical fashion of the show, Ben, is 3, 4, 5 minutes getting to understand who you are, and then we jump into all things around lessons learned, challenges, pivotal moments. So I don't know where you grew up. I can see that you went to uni in New York, but take me back to where you grew up and what life was like growing up where you grew up.
So I grew up in a suburb outside of Boston, a town called Newton, Massachusetts, which is about a 10-minute train ride into the city. And it was the 80s, 1980s, USA, kind of a bit like Stranger Things, only, without the weird aliens and whatnot. And I went to high school in Boston. I went to college in New York, as you mentioned, and then, got out of school and had this moment of, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with my life? I had a liberal arts degree, and didn't have a strong sense. I knew I liked to write, and through hook or crook, managed to get a job at a magazine as a journalist, and really moved on from there.
Did you always want to be a writer?
No, I actually discovered it through reading film criticism when I was in college, mostly. My freshman and sophomore year in college. I liked film. I didn't think that I wanted to go into Hollywood and become a filmmaker. And so, for me, the most exciting thing was just like incredibly pretentious essays about film. And that's what I through that sort of 18, 19, 20-year-old time period, just like aspired to do. Now, having then gone on to become a magazine journalist and a newspaper journalist, my hope is that has been beaten out of me by editors with rulers. But that's certainly where I got my initial inspiration into being a writer.
And before we move on, what led you to choose liberal arts?
Uh, not being interested in the sciences, probably. Now, I did like film. I did like history. I liked, and as my college career went on, I enjoyed reading more. It wasn't the sort of thing that I necessarily enjoyed in high school. But and then inquisitiveness. Not to say that there isn't a lot of inquisitiveness in math or in science. Obviously, there is. But what I found turned out to be my core motivation was just curiosity, and being able to ask people questions or being able to research questions in a book, and that's something that still to this day is a driving motivation for me.
So we're going to get on to Message Lab in a moment, but I'd like to rewind the clock before we talk about that. You spent over a decade, 13, 14 years between CIO magazine and Wall Street Journal. For the listeners, in CIO magazine, you wrote featured stories, and then at the Wall Street Journal, you covered technology. I'm reading from some of my notes here. Yep. So my question is, in that, let's say, decade-long part of your life, what skills or behaviors did you learn or improve during that time at those companies that you've carried with you to today in your current venture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, for me, it was really figuring out what your role is as a communicator and as a storyteller. So for instance, in the world of journalism, success or failure hinges on whether or not I can make you care about something. Can I get you to read? And that's value. You subscribe to a magazine, you buy a newspaper, you stay on an article if it's digital where there's an advertisement you might be seeing, because the words on the page, or these days the experience that you're having, is interesting, and that's the currency. That's how you succeed or fail. And you get trained to do that. You learn there's some trade craft in terms of the structure of an article, the structure of a story, finding a hook, finding an angle, and so forth. But really, what you have to do is you get trained to figure out what is the method, what is the angle through which I can take an idea and make it, interesting to someone. And like, no surprise, people respond to stories about people. If you just have an idea and you're talking about something in a sort of hyper intellectualized way, yes, you might communicate your point to some people, but many more people are going to want to hear about Ryan or Ben's sort of lived experience and a lesson told through somebody else's life journey. Puppies, people also like puppies. In a business setting, there's not as many opportunities to use puppies, but if you can use puppies, and then to go out and to figure out how to actually get the story, because it's one thing for you and I to have a conversation, as as someone who's an interviewer, sometimes you ask, Ben Worthen a question and you get as an answer, and sometimes you ask someone else the question, you get an amazing, thoughtful answer. And what, people always, I'm sure everybody has had one point said like, what is your list of questions? What are the things that you're trying to get out of an interview? One of the things that I learned is that, great questions, they're helpful, but what's really, really helpful is recognizing when you got a great answer. And if you didn't get a great answer, being able to have a toolkit that allows you to ask the same question in a different way so that you can get that great answer. Because the way one person answers a question and provides information is different from the way someone else may provide information. And that information exists. It's just like you have to go out and figure out how to get it. And of course, getting that information is in the service of making a point and making that point and packaging it in a way that's going to be really, really interesting to the person that you're trying to reach, to your audience.
I love the point you make where you can ask a question in a different format, and it might land differently and therefore get the good answer that you're looking for. Post your time at both Wall Street Journal and CIO Magazine, you moved on to Sequoia Capital. You were head of content there. And given the title, I assume you led a team. I know on your LinkedIn it said that you advised portfolio companies on content and communication strategies, as well as some of the internal stuff you did with Sequoia as well. So assuming that you were leading a team or a group of people, what's a challenge that you came up against with either your team or when communicating with the portfolio clients that you would have come up against time and time again, that you, when you left, you can look back on and say that you can like, I'll give you an example here. So like learned helplessness is something my friend was talking to me about maybe 2-3 weeks ago when we were having a beer. And he said when he got the position as a manager in the company, a lot of reps were coming up to him and asking him, how do you do this? Or how do you do that? Or asking him questions. And his natural response would usually be something along the lines of, what would you do if I wasn't here? Or go away and come back again in 4 hours time and, like work and we can sit down together, forcing them to kind of work on it to see what they would have come up with, not always just providing the answer, because you're never teaching anyone if you just provide them the answer. So was there anything in your period of time over a year at Sequoia that in a leadership role you can look back on and smile and say you learned something there, or you left a positive impact there?
Yeah, I'm going to answer your question slightly differently, if that's okay.
Sure.
For me, when I look at that period in my career, the biggest thing was, and really something that has become formative for the rest of my career, was something I learned about how to apply what I knew from the world of journalism to the world of marketing. And I'll explain for a minute. When I was leaving journalism, I'd just been a journalist. I didn't know how to do anything else. I could tell a story and I could do that really, really well. I had never actually heard the term content marketing at that point, which seems ridiculous, sitting here in 2022, but this was like 2012, 2013, and it was still new. It wasn't, revolutionary or anything like that. But I remember having, breakfast meeting with someone who was advising me, and he explained to me what content marketing was. And I was like, oh, I understand. I think I could do that. But what I learned when I got to Sequoia was that I was really strong on the content part, and I really knew nothing about the marketing part of it. And as a journalist, I would be in, people, marketing executives and CEOs of companies and PR people would, parade in, especially when you're at the Wall Street Journal, which is a fairly, top newspaper, especially for business audiences. And they would come in and they would try to pitch me. They would give me their best marketing spiel. And most of the time I would sit there and I would just think to myself, like, nobody cares about this. As the person whose job it is to take what you are trying to say and figure out how I can package it up in a way that's interesting to my audience, you're making it really hard because, you're talking about yourself. But the reality is that, like, most people have never heard of you. Most people aren't experiencing the problem that you're trying to solve, at least the way you're talking about it. I mean, like, how many people in your life do you know who go off and buy like software? Like, not a lot of people. Now, a lot more people use software. Most of us these days and age do. But if you're just talking about how good a deal your software is, like, you're really, you're missing a lot of potential people. What I didn't appreciate then was how much rigor goes into positioning and messaging and crafting the way that a company is going to communicate. There's a lot of smart people working really hard and basing what they're saying on a lot of really good inputs. Now that said, so I didn't know how to do any of that, like, to be clear. No, I didn't have an appreciation for it. I didn't understand some of the organizational dynamics that you're bringing up, like how to get buy-in. I didn't understand culturally how hard it can be to shift a conversation, especially one that's been taking place in a certain way for a really long time at a big company. And so I had to learn all of that stuff. And I had to, at the same time, the thing that I was fairly committed to from the get-go was not losing the parts about journalism that I thought were really, really valuable. Communicating in a way that that is designed to first and foremost be interesting to the people that you're trying to reach. Like, how do you make the message, the marketing lingo, if you will, subservient to the thing that you care about, to the thing that I care about, to the thing that your reader, your audience cares about, but do so in a way where you were still achieving all of the things that were on, that slide deck somewhere where the strategic objectives were laid out. And so my year at Sequoia, and I was only there for a little bit over a year, really sort of gave me an opportunity to think hard about how do you merge those two things together? How do you do so in a way that still achieves what the organization, the company is trying to achieve, but does so in a way that puts the audience first? That makes it so they don't feel like they are being marketed to, but that they are being brought along to some sort of journey that they want to go on, as opposed to the one that they have to sit through while they wait for the game to come back on.
You're now the CEO of Message Lab. Rather than me give the 30-second commercial, you're the CEO. You do a much better job at it. So the mic is yours.
Yeah, so this notion of what I was just talking about, how do you tell a story in a way that's engaging to people, is kind of what we do. Now, it goes a bit deeper than that. We apply journalism techniques to make a journalistic product, meaning the thing that you would see that we make, an article, a podcast, a video, the thing that to you, it's going to find you, or you're going to find it, and you're going to want to pay attention to it because it's interesting to you. It's a story about a person. It's a story about an idea. It's a story about something that it doesn't feel like marketing. Now, what Message Lab is trying to do is not just have that run your message through the filter of what it is that people are going to care about, but to do so in a way that's smart and that gets results. So how do we make sure that it reaches the person that you're trying to reach, and how do we make sure that the person that person, whether they're finding it in search, whether they're finding it in social, whether it's being dropped in their inbox, but what is the work that we can do to take this content and get it in front of people and get people to the place that you want to go? Where does it fit in a user journey? What are the next things that we want people to do? We don't happen to believe that it's realistic to give someone a really cool story and then expect them to click buy now. Usually what we find is that it takes, a handful of ideas. We use a metaphor of an idea store. You want to, everybody has a good sense of what their product store is. That's the stuff that you make and you sell to people. And and even if it's a website, you know what the virtual shelves look like, and the kind of experience that you're trying to create for your customers. But what if you had a store next door that was an idea store? And the shelves were stocked with your ideas, the things you care about, the thing your audience cares about, and the sort of the thoughts that you want to put out into the world, what would that look like? What are the things that we would make that belong in that idea store? And then what we try to do is make people repeat customers of your ideas. Let's get them to come back, to that idea store over and over and over again. And eventually they're going to walk and they're going to see that door that says like, oh, there's a whole nother product store next door. I'm going to go check that out, and but we want them to do it at an appropriate time. And what we see through data and what we just know for intuitively is that it's those people who become repeat customers of your ideas that are more likely to become customers of your products. And then the last thing that we try to do is we try to take a really data forward approach where, I happen to believe that if you give people things that they care about, you're going to, there's times where people want to buy something, and when you want to buy something, getting information about a product is great. It's going to help make your decision-making process, but, I personally, I want to buy something like 5% of the time, 95% of the time, I want to be entertained. I want to be informed. Just want to, spend time with something that I'm interested in. And if all you're doing is putting product stuff out into the world, you're missing 95% of the opportunities to have a relationship, have a meaningful interaction with someone who you might be trying to reach. And that same person, might later on be someone who responds to your product. But if they're not in there, they might be that target customer. You could have a slide that says like, here's who we're trying to reach. Bam, we found them. But like, if they're not thinking about a product, if they're not in product world and on product brain, they're not going to pay attention. They're not going to click. This is why banner ads have like, a negligible click-through rate, right? But if you give them content, something that's meant to inform them, then you have a chance to have that interaction and to begin to build a relationship with them. The last thing we do, and I realize I'm giving you a very long-winded answer here, and you asked for a short one, because the world of modern marketing is so measurable, you can do those, banner ads advertising your product. You can target people in Facebook saying 10% off, and then you can pull a report that says, hey, you know what? We spent $1 million on Facebook ads offering a 10% off coupon, and it generated $2 million in revenue. That's a math problem, Whereas traditionally, if you make content, you're like, we made something that we thought was really cool, and a bunch of people saw it, and we all felt really good. And that's not like if you're going into the boardroom and it's like, your warm fuzzies versus the hard data, it's like, where's the budget going to go, right? So, we believe that, again, people who have repeat engagements with your content, your ideas, are more likely over time going to become customers or better customers. What we try really hard to do is show that with data, to build a connective tissue with analytics, to see what content is getting people to come back, what content is getting people to take that next step in a user journey, and so forth, so that when these Facebook people come in and say, $1 million in spending, $2 million in revenue, we can come in and say, 15% of your qualified leads had previously engaged with a piece of our content. The people who have seen 3 or more, 10% of those people, went on to become qualified leads. And basically, and those people converted at 4x the rate of people who hadn't seen content. If you can come in and have that kind of conversation, all of a sudden, you're speaking the same language as those people who are just doing the product stuff, even though the content itself isn't about the product. You're doing something else.
And it's fair to say you've worked with a lot of admired logos or companies. That anyone take a quick look at your website can see that some of the clients you've worked with: ServiceNow, Facebook, Airbnb, Forbes, VMware. Is there a campaign that you're proud of that you can talk about in the podcast? And I asked that because when I was looking at your website, I can see that you've helped GoDaddy get the word out about the economic impact of 15 million commercial websites it hosts in the US, and then helped the likes of Airbnb engage and recruit more hosts. So is there I suppose the last part was kind of re-jog your memory, but is there a campaign or something that you've...
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of different examples. So GoDaddy, you mentioned a second ago, and this is just, I think, a fun little example of how, a journalist or someone who's trained as a journalist. And I don't want to be precious about journalism. I don't think that there's anything necessarily special about it. It's just that you've been trained to behave in a certain way.
Mhm.
But we did this. So GoDaddy has this really interesting, pretty rigorous set of data that they've created. What they've tried to show is people with websites, and these are like the people who sell candles that they make in their, at home, right? Or what is the economic impact of the local store on Main Street adding an e-commerce functionality so that they don't just sell to the people in the surrounding neighborhood, but they could sell to somebody, across the country, for instance. And what they found is that the more of these, online micro businesses that there are, it has a lot of, it adds to the economic vitality of the community, right? The household median income goes up for everybody every single time that these businesses are there. And if you think about it, it makes intuitive sense, right? You're creating jobs for a broad range of people, you're expanding the commerce opportunities and so forth. But the data that they have is really compelling. Now, data is data. And I think one of the things that we find is that people, especially professionals, really respond well to data. But this thing we were talking about before, the journalism toolkit is like, yeah, but tell me how the data, tell me how it affects real people. And so we followed the data and we found that there's this, you would think where are there going to be a lot of online business? San Francisco, right? Places like that. It turns out one of the towns with the highest concentration of these online businesses is Fairfield, Iowa. Good luck finding it on a map. It's got 10,000 people. It's just this tiny little town in Iowa. And so we did what a journalist does, which is we went and talked to the people in Fairfield. And what we found was, this was a place that had this entrepreneurial culture because the yogi who had taught the Beatles how to meditate moved there in the 1970s. And all of these businesses had popped up, and especially over COVID, because of this entrepreneurial time, people were very fast to adapt to selling business, to selling things online. And among these, one guy we found who has this patented method for horse massage. And in the early days of COVID, he had to figure out, how do you massage a horse online, right? And so we had this great human-driven story about the guy doing online horse massage, the guy who started selling sourdough online, the local artists, and it's one of those stories from a storytelling standpoint that I'm really proud of, because it just shows that if you're just in a conference room thinking about how do we tell this story, you don't pick up the phone or go get on a plane and talk to the people in Fairfield, Iowa. But it turns out their stories and their lived experiences are the things that are going to be most engaging to people, like online horse massage, the Beatles, you kind of have it all, right? But that was there. That's just the story that, we had to uncover. Another example, slightly different, that I'll give you is some of the work that we've done with ServiceNow. For the last 4 years, we've run an online publication called Workflow. And, ServiceNow makes software that helps people sort of automate a lot of what used to be manual processes. And so the idea is that rather than have to spend your time pushing paper, you can spend your time doing some, more impactful thinking work, right? And what we did was, they traditionally sold their software to people who go ahead and implement it, but they wanted to reach a higher level audience, the C-suite, and anybody who's been in B2B sales knows that when you reach a certain level of executive, they don't care about speeds and feeds. They just want to know what is going to be the impact of my business. And so this publication is all about, how technology advances are going to change the way, culture of business, the way you run a team, the strategic thinking that you can do to propel your business. The site itself, though, is really a laboratory for a lot of these things that we believe. So we have a lot of analytics on the site that are customized in order to measure engagement with content. We have it's not there's none of the creepy stuff, right? This is all sort of anonymous, but we're still seeing what ideas resonate with people. We can use the site to do a lot of message testing, where we're pretty rigorous about, again, to get geeky, codifying what different things are about, and being to figure out okay, are people more interested in stories that are about a different part of technology, like the technology side of business transformation? Are they interested in the employee experience? Are they interested in stories about how they can better engage with customers? And we do a lot of testing about that, in addition to figuring out which audiences are most interested in which messages, and that's all stuff that we can do by being very purposeful about the content that we create, right? Every single piece of content is basically treated as an experiment. We treat the template as something where we're constantly testing to try to figure out how we can make the layout, the experience of consuming the content more engaging. Like there's this attitude in web development, it's a little outdated, but it's still around, that like you design a template and it's done. And I think our approach is that like, no, you're constantly testing everything. Should you have an image above the headline or below a headline? Does it matter whether it's serif font or sans serif font? What if we have this CTA to sign up for email in the middle versus a pop-up? All of these things are testable, and all of them are going to contribute to whether somebody has a good experience or a bad experience, or whether they spend more time with your content or less time with your content. So, those are all things that we're trying to do on this program. It's just been hugely successful. It's been going for 4 years. We've probably published 1,000 stories in partnership with ServiceNow at this point. And I can't even tell you the vast number of people who've come in and not just seen a page, like had a page view, but who we know, because of what we're measuring, spent like a meaningful amount of time reading. So and then also how many of those went on to have a more business as opposed to a content interaction and engagement with ServiceNow.
And what I'll do is I'll leave links to both your LinkedIn and your company site wherever people are watching or listening to this if they want to learn more. But we're coming up near the end. I've got 2 final questions for you. When you look at the year ahead and continuing to grow the company, what are some of the ways or strategies or growth strategies that you're focused on to continue to grow? And when I say that, previous guests have touched on popular answers would be landing in new territories, partnerships, adding more bodies to the team, getting a bigger piece of the pie within current accounts, so like upselling or cross-selling. For you, what are you focused on to continue to grow the Message Lab in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been really lucky in that just within our existing client base, there's people who want to keep doing work with us. And so, for us, I think we are going to grow just as a result of continuing to do more work with our current clients. And then I would ask, to sort of give an answer that's sort of potentially, useful to somebody, in terms of growth, for us, it's really about 2 things. One, we're really combining, journalism, the reporting aspect of journalism, design. I guess one answer is that over the last year, we've really invested heavily in our design capabilities. And so doing more sort of experience-led and design-led, still journalistic, types of projects is one of the areas where we anticipate growth. And then also on that analytics and, audience building side of things. And to be perfectly honest, there's so many ways that we can combine those three different teams that are, that haven't been done before for the most part. And, and the thing that's hard sometimes is reining ourselves in, and trying to figure out, okay, what is the, what are we going to focus on? And so like, for instance, this year, one of the things we're focusing on is finding clients who do a lot of content and just helping them figure out how to make it more effective. We've watched how we've used data to look at how millions of people engage with content online. And we have a team of people who are experts at creating content, designing content, and, and we just know a lot about, for instance, the placement of subheads, can make a huge difference. The URL structures you choose can make a big difference. Like, there's just like some mechanic stuff. And so can we bring people can we just go in and say like, great, don't have us make your content, just hire us and we'll tell you how to take the stuff that you have and get a lot more benefits out of it, And then the other thing is that we're just trying to maintain our sort of deep connections to the world of journalism and just figure out what are the emerging trends there in the world of journalism that are, that are either engaging people or being utilized to drive traffic to publishing sites, and can we figure out how to adapt that for our clients as well.
Final question for you, Ben. If you were in charge of adding a mandatory subject to the high school curriculum, I'm not too sure what age that is in the States, but let's say like between 12 to 16, what subject would you add and why?
Oh boy. Yeah, so I guess take this straight out of the school board campaign, or right into it, I suppose. I would say, as much as I want to say journalism and training people to write well and ask questions well and all of that, I might actually say something around data or data analytics or even data visualization. Are there, in many ways, for me at least, they're kind of similar in a weird way, where in the case of journalism, you are driven by questions and you're trying to find an answer to something by digging and digging and digging. Analytics is oftentimes the same way. We make a distinction between data that you might see in a dashboard and analysis and insights, which come from a human looking at the data and trying to ask questions. And I think both are, incredibly valuable skills to have. But I kind of suspect moving forward, the ability for, a young person getting out of high school to be familiar with looking at data and being able to try to figure out, how do I figure out what's happening? How do I craft data into some sort of story? And I don't mean like a piece of journalism, but I mean structure an argument based on data. And then how do I frame it in a way that's going to be compelling to people and persuasive to people?
Ben, it's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast. I've enjoyed the last 35 minutes with you. But for now, thanks again for being my guest, and I wish you continued success.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.